Hi and welcome to another painting tutorial from Promethean Paints. Today we're going to be painting Vulkan He'Stan from the Salamanders. So yeah, we've pretty much built the model complete and just kept the base separate, which I'll go over how I did the base a bit later. Kept his head separate because we're doing a glowing effect from his neck area. But there you go, I've built him pretty much complete and just super glued him on. I've then cut away the flames that were on the base of his foot, on his right foot. Just cut those away with a pair of snips, as I didn't want those on my base. And then I've undercoated the model in just AK Tenebrous Grey, but any matte black primer will do. So the first step, using the airbrush, using the Vallejo White Ink, we're going to be base coating the armour. And with this, I'm concentrating the airbrush on the areas that I want to be brighter, using the natural gradient haloing effect the airbrush provides to do our natural fade from bright white down to the black grey of the base coat primer. So the areas that I want to be bright green, that's where your most white's going to be, and any of the darker areas just leave with just a couple of sprays of the white, so it just, you can see some of that undercoat showing through. You'll notice that I've left an area on his right leg. That's where we're going to be, the red glow is from the lava. So I've not sprayed any white onto that because I know it's going to be have the OSL effect onto it. So any areas that you know you're not going to be painting that colour, you can just leave, because we're going to be over painting it later on. But it doesn't matter if you still paint some on there, because you can always go over it again with the other colours. This is acrylic colours, so it's nothing we do is 100% final. Everything can always be adjusted and amended as we go. So yeah, just work around the model, add in the white. You could do this via dry brushing. I would sort of use the Artify dry brushes or the Artist Opus dry brushes, the sort of rounder, stubbier ones with very soft hairs, and just apply the dry brushing, the colour, the white, very, very subtly. Don't use an ink, just use a normal acrylic paint white, like Skull White or AK Intense White, to do that. So as you can see, what I'm explaining here is obviously where the glow is going to be coming from the lava. It's going to be hitting this sort of central area, which is why I've left that slightly darker and not really impacted the white too much on that. So now the next stage is to make it green and use the Citadel contrast, which is the striking scorpion green, straight from the pot, straight into the airbrush, obviously after cleaning it out from the white. And this is almost like applying an ink. It's a bit thicker, but you just want to do short, sharp bursts. Don't do too much at once, otherwise it will spider web and pull and run and just look awful. So just very short, sharp, concentrated bursts over all of the armour, covering even the dark areas that you've left or that are gradients. Cover everything in this green. The more you add, the more intense the green is. You'll notice as you're spraying it on, you can get it greener and greener and greener. So just get it to the green that you like, where there's that natural contrast between very, very light and very, very dark. And then give it a few minutes to dry. I always leave about 10 or 15 minutes for this to dry. It's pretty much dry as soon as it's within a minute, but I just like to let all of the colours settle down once this has been done. You could, if you wanted to, apply some varnish, some matte varnish, just to protect it. Okay, whilst that's waiting to dry, we can actually prime up some other areas. So what I've done is I've just gone back and painted all of the darker areas back with the Tenebrous Grey, and I've painted his backpack in Army Painters, War Painters matte black, so that we've gone back to sort of scratch on it. So for the base, what I'm doing now is I'm using the same methods we've done on the armour, but now I'm painting in where I want the glowing effects of the lava to be. So to create that rippling effect, that's a bit of cork that's just stuck to the base, a couple of gamer grass tufts that were added, and then I use some acrylic medium from Liquitex, the brilliant gel, the gloss gel. You can buy it from art shops. It's about £5 for about 250 millilitres. You get loads of it, quite cheap, and it's really good at creating sort of a lava effect, so you can splodge it on with a brush and then use your brush to create pools and ripples and flows. So all I'm doing there is using the design that I've done with the sort of the flow to then concentrate, so the whiter is going to be the hotter areas, and then using the airbrush and the angles just to get some overspray onto the top of the rock, so the top of the rock looks like it's reflecting the light back. So yeah, a lot like we've done the armour, but just imagine that the intense white is where it's hottest. So in our little world we're creating here, the brighter the colour on these fluorescents is the hotter areas. So for lava, it's yellow is the hottest and the dark colours are the coldest. And then for the glowing effect in the inside the head area, just concentrate the airbrush to the front facing part, so have a little bit of overspray, a couple of sprays onto the back, but just make sure the brightest point is towards the front, so that's where it's going to be brightest and glowing. So you can see a couple of sprays there and we've already got a really good glowing effect with just no colour at all. And then whilst we're there, we're going to be doing the glowing effect on the salamander icon on the top of his backpack. So what I want is as you're looking at the model, the fire's coming from the left hand side of the icon, so that's where I want it to be brightest. So the brightest points of my flame are that bottom left hand corner, and then I imagine it's getting darker as it's going out, the smoke's getting darker. So just using the natural way the airbrush works, point the trigger to where you want it brightest, and it will just naturally create those haloing gradients that are so good for our heat effects. And then on the sword, I want a couple of little sprays on the tip, but really I'm aiming the nozzle in the central point of the end of his spear, so that that point is the hottest and the rest is cold, getting a little bit of overspray on the rest. So as you can see here, just tipping the model into lots of different angles just to get the effect that I want. Again, once you finish this, give it a couple of minutes for that white ink to dry. I then grab my Green Stuff World Fluorescent Yellow Orange, so it's a sort of pre-mixed colour you can get from Green Stuff World. It's really good actually for doing a sort of slightly dirtier, darker lava effect. And all I'm doing here is I added a couple of drops of water, not too much, you don't want this to be too thin, but just enough for it to flow out the airbrush, and then just spray it across your lava base that we've done, ensuring you're covering all of it, including any overspray. So anything you've painted white needs to be painted with the fluorescent yellow orange. So here we're doing it on the spear, and then I move on to the flame effect on the icon, but don't paint the helmet area, this neck area. That's just going to be the next step that we do. Don't paint that to the orange colour. Unless you wanted this similar effect, then you could, but if you want to go for the effect that you can see in the pictures, don't paint the icon, don't paint the neck area. So there we go, once it's dry, again a few minutes just to let it dry. Now grab the Green Stuff World Fluorescent Red. This is a fantastic colour. This adds, oddly it darkens it down but really makes things glow. So a couple of drops of water, and now I'm angling the airbrush so that I'm only catching the sort of top part of the base. So getting a little bit of overspray, so turning the top part of the cork red. And then the rest of the spray is I'm sort of moving the airbrush up and down vertically, and I'm only catching the top edges of the lava base, making sure that the yellowy orange is still staying in its core. Takes a little bit of practice, but it's almost like dry brushing but with an airbrush, and with that effect you'll be catching the edges and any raised parts, but leaving that lovely bright core. And it's that simple. Catch a little bit of the Game of Grass front there, you can see the tufts just reflecting a little bit of the light, just to give it a little bit more added realism. And then any dark areas that you've got, you can just spray a little bit of this into those sections just to darken down any areas around any ridges, any areas that you want to just lessen that yellowy orange glow. And on the spear, it's really the exact same principles. We're working from the tip of the spear, which is the coldest part, down to the brightest. So I'm focusing attention on the tip, making that as red as I can, and then a little bit of overspray onto the very ridges of the iconography that's on the actual spear itself, just clearing away any clogs that you get. I don't use an expensive airbrush, as I showed at the beginning part of the video. This is a £30 Fengda airbrush from Amazon, nothing fancy, but it does achieve some great results. And for the icon, again, spraying from top to bottom, so keeping the bright orange and yellow in the core heart of it where I want it to be hotter, and then the rest of it toning it more and more red the further away you get from the bright points. And the actual neck glow, just spray the whole area with the fluorescent red and it will naturally create the glowing effect. It will be brightest in those bright points and dullest in the other areas. Okay, now we're just making a little mix. So grab AK Tenebrous Grey and some Vallejo Red Ink. The red ink is optional, but it just makes things go a little bit redder. Mix it all together in the airbrush and you get a nice, very, very dark, almost blackish purple red mix. And then this is our coldest colour. So with this we'll be spraying the very top parts of the spear to make them look like they're crusted lava, very, very cold. The top of the iconography, so it looks like the dirty coldest part of the smoke. And then a little bit on the base just to darken down the lava effects. Yeah, so there we go, you can just see it coming through there. You can see on my hand it's a very, very darkish red colour. So here I'm just darkening down the cork, turning it dark, dark red, almost black. And then any areas that I want to be dark on the actual lava itself, just giving those a little spray of this colour, very, very small amount, very, very subtle. Don't go too crazy with the trigger. Just a few little areas in those dark places. So, as the legend Bob Ross and James Wapple, who paints models in oils, without light you can't have dark, and without dark you can't have light. So having those light and dark areas very close to each other, huge contrast drops, really sells the effects that are glowing effects. It's a key point to it. Same with non-metallic metals, contrast is king. So yeah, as you can see, I'm spraying it on the very tip of the sword, and then it will be on the tips of all the smoke. And then whilst we've got the airbrush out, we're going to give it a really good clean, a very thorough clean with the colours we've just used. Grab some Citadel Evil Sunz Scarlet. I've got the air, but you can just use the standard version, just add a couple of drops of water. And this is going to be our glowing effect from the lava itself. So for this model, it's on his right foot and the inside. Just a couple of sprays of this saves us having to brush in any glazes. This would all be glazing work if we didn't have the airbrush. So I'm just spraying in, not haphazardly, there is control here of the areas that I wanted to be reflecting the lava, really so that it means we don't have to paint some areas and then overpaint them with our glowing effect. We already know where our glowing effect is going to be now, the object source lighting, so we don't have to worry about painting those with any other colours. We can just make them glow differently and then focus our attentions on getting the good contrast between dark and light of the actual base colours of the model. So there, I'm just putting a little bit onto the backpack where it's reflecting down from the icon as well. Very, very easy to do, but gives an amazing effect. final step, using some Tenebrous Grey, is just some very soft dry brushing. Because this is pure now, Tenebrous Grey. This will be very soft, just in any of the darkest areas and the tips of the lava, the tip of the spear and the tips of the smoke where you want it to be the darkest. Very, very subtle, but well worth doing. You can then, if you wanted to, use some black, Corvus black. I think there's AK Smoky Black as well, but the Tenebrous Grey is dark enough for what I wanted to go to. So first up is his face, and the nocturnes are sort of dark bluish grey. So to achieve this, I'm using AK Oxford Blue, which is sort of like a Calgar blue, maybe not an ultramarine blue. I think this would be a Calgar blue in the Citadel range. Very, very dark. Maybe even Night Lord's blue would be a bit better. Just a very dark blue. And we're base coating the entire face with this. And then I've got some Flayed One Flesh from Citadel, and all I'll be doing is applying the highlights by doing mixes of Flayed One Flesh and Oxford Blue to get lighter and lighter skin tones. It looks quite stark at first, but then we do a wash over the top to just pull back some of those highlights. But painting the faces is pretty much the same across all, so you just highlight the nose, the eyes, the cheeks, the lips, the forehead in brighter and brighter tones. But with this, we've got obviously some red glowing effect we want to cater for. So the sort of underside of the chin area and the sort of metal parts around, we're just going to leave black or dark, and we're going to be doing some fancy glowing effects on those, just so that they're bouncing back the light from the neck. But as you can see there, just making mixes of colours, getting progressively lighter as we go. Once you've done that, I then grab some AK Wine Red, or you could use some watered down Volupus Pink, or from Citadel Contrast, and just apply this like you would a flesh wash across all of the face. I've thinned mine down quite heavily, probably too much, so I have to do about 3 coats, but you do need to thin this down quite heavily because wine red is a very pigment heavy colour, same as any contrast paint, so they do need heavily thinned. And then once you've done that and it's dried, good 10-15 minutes, we're going to create the glowing effects now. And to do that, we're using AK Blood Red, or you could use Evil Sunz Scarlet from Citadel. White, mine is AK Intense White, and then the green stuff, well, Fluorescent Red. And what I'm doing here is, obviously we've got the glowing effect rising up from his neck, and now I want his face and all of that fancy machinery around his head to be reflecting some of that light. So I'm just doing simple, almost edge highlights with the blood red, just to be like, that's our glowing effect, that's the bounce back light coming from all of that, those red lights in his armour. And then those areas that we're just painting red, I then edge highlight with white, pure white. And then once that white is dry, I then go over all those areas with the fluorescent red from Green Stuff World, and it gives us a very easily good looking bounce backed face that looks like, yeah, the light's reflecting back from his head, quite moody, quite dark. I then do the same for his eyes. I paint the whole of the eye the blood red, or the Evil Sunz Scarlet. Then do 2 little dots for the eyes in white, and then paint over that whole area with the fluorescent red. Gives us our glowing eyes. I then add some fluorescent orange from AK onto the wet palette, and add a couple of little dots of fluorescent orange into those eyes as well, just to make them look extra hot, extra fiery. So I've then gone ahead and attached his head onto the model, so you can see our effect is, it's amazing, just really good looking from different angles. And then just to finish it off, I just edge highlight the inside of his armour around the neck with just some little dots of white. Not a full 100% line there, just little scrapey dots and lines, just to show there's a little bit of texture on that armour. And then edge highlight that, over that edge highlight, go over it with the fluorescent red. And that paint, those of you that you know, it's a little bit like a contrast paint, the Fluor colours from Green Stuff World, even from AK. So you can apply them quite thick, or if they're not going on as well, just a couple of coats will do. And then I just add a little bit of fluorescent orange just to intensify that object source lighting, bounce back light that we've created there. But as you can see there, with a few simple steps, we've got an already stunning looking model. We've still got some fun to have. So now we're going to do some non-metallic metal gold, and I'm using 3 colours, which is AK Whole Red, AK Sahara Yellow, and some AK Ice Yellow. And then we'll be doing some mixing as we go, but this is relatively straightforward. So as you can see, I'm base coating all of the areas I want to do gold in the whole red, which would be Rhinox hide if you were using Citadel, and Zamizi Desert is the middle colour, and then Ice Yellow is sort of like a dawn yellow. So I'm base coating everything here that I want to be gold in whole red. But where I've got that bounce back light already done by the airbrush, that red, I'm leaving a dark line of Tenebrous Grey, or the black, in between it, so that you've got a break of reflections and light sourcing from the gold to the lava reflections. So I'm going to be showing you how I painted a couple of the sections and then in full, and then show you how the model looks once I've done all of the sections that are gold. Otherwise, if I didn't do that, this video would be about another half hour, 45 minutes in length. It doesn't take too long to do non-metallic gold, especially on this model where there's actually not that much. It's quite small sections of it, so it doesn't take too long. If you were to paint, if you didn't want to do non-metallic metal and you wanted just to do true metallic metal, then choose your base coat of a dark gold colour, like a Balthasar gold for instance, or AK rusty gold, and then do your top colour, top highlight of, you know, Retributor Armour or Old Gold from AK, and just work through your highlights. But always remember to leave those dark tones in between so that you've got the jump from the dark to the light. So next up we're adding our mid-tone, which is the Sahara Yellow. Now the Sahara Yellow is our first edge highlight as well, so try and edge highlight everything in this Sahara Yellow, as well as filling in any areas that you want to be bright gold. So leave the whole red in your deepest shadows, and the Sahara Yellow forms the first part of our gold colour. Once we've done that sort of edge highlighting and blocking in the areas that we want to be gold, I then move over to the ice yellow and I just add spot highlights, little dot highlights to those areas that I want to be brightest. Again, I'm not truly edge highlighting here. I'm adding little dots and scratch marks and lines to the areas that I would know would be reflecting the light the brightest, doing little edge highlights here. So it's quite fine work, but it's not too tricky. And I've got some other videos that we do other non-metallic metals on some bigger areas using some different techniques But for this I didn't want to do too much mixing in between each one. I wanted to show that you can just do it very simply with sort of 3 colours and a couple of washes, and just a bit of edge highlighting and a bit of well placed contrast effects. So to blend these colours back together and to sort of darken down the shadows, I've made a wash of the whole red. So that's 1 drop of whole red to probably 3-4 drops of water. Same way you would do this with Rhinox hide. And this is our sort of glaze, and now I'm glazing this around any rivets and pushing it back into those shadow areas, so that we're creating a bit of a blend from the ice yellow, the Sahara yellow, and the initial whole red underneath, and it breaks up some of those hefty changes that we had. Once that wash is dry, I wanted just to add some yellow into all of this. So I'm grabbing the Citadel contrast Iandan yellow, and then probably this is 1 drop of paint to 1 drop of water, so that's probably a 50-50 mix, you would say. And then just apply a thin layer of this over the gold. This is optional, but it does make it a bit more yellow, a bit more golden. Once that contrast mixes dry, I then just reintroduce some Dawn Yellow as my main highlights again, just to bring back those bright points, as that contrast does dull it down a little bit. So now I just do some simple edge highlighting and a few dot highlights just back over the top of where we had our original ice yellow showing. And that's it for our non-metallic metal. You can now go on and just paint the rest of the areas. But just before that, I'm just going to show you how I then highlight our red glowing areas that's on this leg armour as well, in the bottom corners there. So where we've already introduced some of that airbrushed, I'm just adding some edge highlights of the blood red or evil sun scarlet straight over those areas that I want to be reflecting the light a bit brighter. So obviously the metals will be reflecting it more than the cloth areas, which is why I'm just adding in some edge highlights to the armour and the armour's trim, as I want those to be brighter. So this is just sort of intensifying the redness of the bounce back glow that we're creating. So I want, the armour and trim to be brighter reflections than that found on any other materials. Okay, now using the white, a little bit like we did with the glowing effect on his head, we're doing the same. But for this, I'm just going to be focusing on the armour panels and the trim. So sort of edge highlighting those highlights we've just done. So any of the areas that you really want to be really glowing the effect is add this white because over the top of this we'll be adding the fluorescent red and a little bit of fluorescent orange. So what we're introducing here is we'll be saying, hey look, this area is reflecting the lava, and these materials are reflecting it more, and by doing that, that's, you know, we're sort of giving it some, looking like there's different materials on the model, different textures on the character, and we can achieve that by doing brighter highlights on different sections, so the eye knows that you've got gold trim and can pick out that it's reflecting the light a bit more. It's a simple trick of the eye, but very effective. So yeah, as you can see, I'm just edge highlighting everything in the white, and then painting over the edge highlight and a little bit either side with the fluorescent red, and then on the gold trim areas, the areas that are closest to the bottom, I put in a little bit of fluorescent orange over the top just to make it look like those bits are really reflective. And I do that on his spear and on the backpack as well, as you saw from the previous clips. Again, very simple but really effective. Okay, you just saw me finishing off some of the other gold there with some white highlights. Now we're going to be doing some non-metallic metal silver, which is the same principles of the gold, 3 colours, 3 very simple placements. So we start off with AK Basalt Grey, then AK Graphite, and then Vallejo Silver Grey. So you could use sort of Storm Vermin Fur, and then Administratum Grey, and maybe Orthan Grey from the Citadel range. And like the gold, we base coat everything in the Basalt Grey, and then we do smaller highlights with the Graphite, your sort of mid-tone, and then edge highlighting and spot highlights with the Silver Grey. Very simple to do. There's not much silver on this. The spear, so there's the sort of spear shaft is metal silver, and a little bit on the sort of little like fuel tank that's on his belt. Is pretty much it. So it's mostly just base coating and edge highlighting and doing little spot highlights with the Silver Grey. Okay, so we've got lots of new techniques, lots of new methods we're doing here. And the next one, we're doing some more non-metallic metals, and we're doing a bronzy copper. So we've got a whole red, medium rust, light rust, and pastel peach, all from AK. There's various Citadel colours again for these. There's in the description there's a link to a Daka webpage that's got the colour variations you can use for these. But there are some embossed flames on the inside of his robe that I wanted to be, didn't want to be gold, I wanted to be bronzy copper. So base coat everything in the whole red, and then we get brighter and brighter with the areas that are sort of would be reflecting the light. So we use a medium rust as our mid-tone, covering the areas we want to be bright. Then a little bit of light rust, which really adds the sort of bronzy copperness to it, with edge highlighting with the pastel peach. All relatively the same principles that we've been doing before. Your highlights get smaller and smaller as you go. And I'm just using this, the medium rust covers probably about 90% of the whole red. The light rust covers probably 30%, and the pastel peach only a small amount. And then I do a little bit of ice yellow as our main highlight. But again, if you're doing true metallics, just any of the bronze coppers, Runefang bronze is it, I think, Runefang steel, and brass scorpion, and you've got Sycorax bronze as well. So Citadel do a number of bronze colours. You can also add, it's a bit hard to see, the camera angle is very difficult on this model because of his arms in the way, but if you're nervous about blending, then scratches, lines, dots, it all works to help blend. So a blend doesn't have to be a smooth transition from one colour to the next. You can do it with texture, scratch lines, shards of light as it's catching different parts. There's lots of different ways of doing it. And always practice. If you get it wrong, just paint over it and start again. It's acrylic paints, it's not very thick, so you can certainly have many attempts at it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to be making a mix of Tenebrous Grey and water, probably 1 drop of Tenebrous Grey to 5 or 6 drops of water, and I'm just glazing this into the deepest shadows of the areas we've painted, the non-metallic metal areas that we've done. So that's both the gold, the bronze and copper and silver, and also just over some of the green parts as well, where I'm sort of panel lining some areas, enhancing the shadows and adding it around the recesses. So anywhere where you want to be extra dark, glazing some of this in helps achieve that, helps blend colours together, helps separate certain areas. So it's almost like a panel line wash, and we're enhancing shadows and enhancing shapes around the model. So now we're painting the robe, the sort of dragon scales. So we're using AK Dragon Blood, AK Violet Red, AK Magenta, and then AK Intense Pink. So 4 very vibrant colours in their own way. So at first I just paint the entire robe in the dragon blood. The areas on the box art that are kind of pale white, I'm actually going to be doing those in leather colours. So you can do that. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But the main scaled areas of his robe and his sort of hanging bit down the front, I base coat in dragon's blood. I then apply the first highlight with the violet red, and for this I'm picking out really all of the scales and covering any sort of large ripple areas on the robes, adding scratch marks and texture with the violet red, just to show that those areas are catching the light a bit more, or a bit more heavily worn. But yes, you could dry brush this if you wanted to, but there's a lot of detail around these areas, so it's a bit more controlled with the brush. I thought it would take a while, but once you get started, it's a few minutes just to bring in all of those scale areas. So with the AK Magenta, I now cover probably 80% of the scales again, just the top points of those scales, and do a bit of edge highlighting of the robes and adding some texture marks and lines to the highest points and edges of the robes, but just make sure you highlight all of the little scales that are there. There's a lot of texture to the scales, so you can sort of almost wet dry brush over the top with the magenta. Really starts to bring them out. And then with the intense pink, we do exactly the same, but just in smaller areas. So a little bit of edge highlighting, a few scratch marks, and just edge highlight the main parts of the scales. I focus on the bigger scales with this one, with the intense pink. So the Citadel range, you know, you've got colours like Pink Horror, Screamer Pink, Corn Reds, those sorts of colours you would be looking at using to get a similar result. Okay, for any leather, I'm using AK Leather Brown, AK Saddle Brown, and Cadian Fleshtone from Citadel. You'd be looking really at Steel Legion Drab or Dryad Bark, and then a Mournfang Brown, and then obviously Cadian Fleshtone. So I base coat this leather brown on the inside of the cloak, just taking care of that work we've done. He's got a little bit on his belt, and obviously the skin part of the robes and the handle holdall parts of his spear. We then apply our first highlight with the saddle brown, so just pick out the raised areas, any flat areas that catch the light, any texture that's on the spear itself, pick those out, and of course edge highlight and pick out some texture points on his gun holdall as well. we use the Cadian Fleshtone as our final highlight, so doing some edge highlights using the fine tip of the brush to add some scratches and texture marks on any areas, especially on the robes of the cloak, just picking out all the ridges and rips and tears and holes. Okay, we're getting close to the finish now, so I'm just going to be doing the parchments. So I base coat them all in AK Mud Brown. So again, this sort of Steel Legion drab from Citadel if you're using the Citadel range. And then I use AK Light Earth, which is sort of you Shabti Bone, to do the top highlights of the scrolls. I actually painted the wax. There's a little bit of wax on his robes. I painted that just in Oxford blue, just to keep it away from the pink usually that you see, because I thought it would blend too much with the robes. So these are very straightforward. Yeah, it's base coat everything in your dark mid-tone brown, which for me is mud brown. Then yeah, over the top with the light earth. I do it in little streak marks, little lines, so that just creates some sort of texture to the parchments itself. To highlight the actual green armour, it's not that much to do here. I use AK Frog Green, which you would use Moot Green from Citadel, probably mixed with a little bit of Dawn Yellow, I would find. When I used to use Moot Green, it wasn't as bright as edge highlighting as I wanted, so I always added a little bit of Dawn Yellow. And for this, I'm just simply edge highlighting any of the green, adding a little few scratch marks here and there. There's not too much to do. Then one of the final steps is we just need to highlight the backpack. So for that I use anthracite blue and blue grey from AK. Any dark greyish blue from Citadel will do. And it's just a simple couple of edge highlights on the backpack itself. Not too much here. A couple of scratch lines on those raised areas. But a lot of the backpack is covered with the red glowing effect. So I keep these highlights to a minimum, just so it doesn't distract from the actual highlighting we've done with the flame effects. Finally on the backpack, just to add some red glowing effects to the vents, so just base coat the little holes in the vents with the red colour, so that's blood red for me from AK or Evil Sunz Scarlet, and then add a couple of little dots of white where you want it to be hottest, and then overpaint those with the fluorescent red, just to give us our nice glowing vent effects. It's as straightforward as that. You could add a little bit of fluorescent orange in there if you wanted to once it's dry, just to make those a lot more brighter. And that is it. That is Vulkan He'Stan painted. I've based him, stuck him on the base there, added a little bit of more just green tufts just to show the contrast effects that you can have. Trimmed him in black. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. It's been a great model to paint. Salamanders are always fun to paint. The greens and reds and oranges really go well together. I've got a few tutorials on painting salamanders, and I think we've matched him quite close to the box art, and we have moved away a little bit, but I think we've added a lot more life into the old fella. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, like and subscribe. Add some comments. You can contact me. I'm also a commission painter, so if you've got any commissions you'd like to do, just give us a message and I'll see what I can do for you. Yeah, like, subscribe, add some comments. Feedback is welcome, and as always, happy painting, my flamey friends.